Hi, I'm Michelle Zuby, and I am here with Ryan O'Donnell. Ryan, thank you so much for being here with me today and for your contribution to the text on social media. We all kind of consider you an expert in this area. So if you can, just give us a little bit of your background in social media and your contribution to the text.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you. And I'm excited to contribute to something, but we were talking about this before we went on air, like the work that you all had to do, and then everybody else writing their own parts in this like quick format of it's approved, write it, let's get it in, let's get it published as soon as we can. My hat's off to everybody that contributed, and you all as well for editing. So the social media realm, first of all, I'm a behavior analyst, BCBA. I got into this kind of accidentally as a result of the social media stuff as a result of just scrolling one night and finding one particular vloggers, like a video bloggers page, just fascinating on YouTube. I stayed up all night scrolling through, and I was like, why did I do that? Like, I didn't necessarily understand. I went into work super tired. I was fortunate enough at the time to work at a place with a few other behavior analysts, and I just told them like, hey, I kind of like can't make adult decisions, and like I stayed up all night, and explained why, and they're just kind of like shaking their head. But we had a really good working relationship, and that day I was doing paperwork and things like that, and I was like, what was that? And there was something about the way that the videos were constructed that just like sucked me in. And as I dug into it more and more, I realized like social media is all sorts of different functions that it can provide, right? And for me, it was always this place where just like share some photos with family and friends and potentially get some things seen. There was sometimes like these negative perils and things that you kind of hear about in the background, but for the most part, like I never experienced those. And so it was just kind of this place to post things and potentially connect, with long lost friends and things like that. But when I started realizing and digging into that YouTuber specifically, it was clear that people were using it for different goals. Sometimes that was business related and they were trying to push a product or a service or a tool or technology or something like that. Sometimes that was just like a certain thought or method or ideology or field that they were trying to push forward. So it could be totally different on like what people were doing, but they were using it as a tool to kind of leverage, I would say, or amplify their message and then leverage an audience potentially. So the particular person that I was watching was just this blogger by the name of Neistat. Think about him kind of like a LeBron James of YouTube for a little bit, like a big star that everybody knew about, at least whether or not you're into his content. And I realized that, he had a lot of skill sets when it comes to crafting good stories. He'd previously been in a videography, an advertising business, creating great stuff, hired by like top end people, Mercedes-Benz, these other places, Nike, to be able to make great ads. And I was like, oh, it's not just like a social media platform per se. It's like a place to tell stories, a place to build an audience, a place to kind of like extend these ideas, build businesses, etc. So, but then I realized, I think the big thing there was like the work and the detail that went into thinking about how to create something for it. So at that point, picked up a camera and I've been running around for the last few years trying to understand just how video works, but also like how social media kind of helps get messages amplified. So I started a channel called the Daily BA. The idea was just something daily about behavior analysis. It was in like a video form, amplifying hopefully something cool about behavior analysis. That was basically all the premise was. Started running with that. Over the last 3 or 4 years, I would say, since running that and playing around with that, there's a lot of things that I've realized. And in general, that's that social media is this like loose defined thing of a platform where people are sharing their ideas. Largely what you're doing is you're handing over your content and your data for a company to be able to put out there, potentially give you some things like those additional friends or that you might be looking for, or get your message out there, or maybe even use that to help run some ads for you to convert on sales for, say, like a book like this. But that exchange right there actually is all free. And as I dug into the model more and more, right, like we sign up for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Clubhouse, whatever it is right now that you're into. You sign up for free, and it's because you're really like licensing your information, your data to them to be able to host that they're then gleaming a ton from. And so as I started realizing this, it was like, oh, there's a trove of information here that is really what these social media creators are using to be able to find the people that they're trying to reach at the end of the day. So I would say I guess to kind of like bring this all together, like that was part of, like I stumbled into it and I found that it was very interesting. And then as I dug into the model, I realized like, oh, we're giving up a lot of our behavior or products of our behavior to be able to allow these companies to thrive and do a whole lot of things, some of which benefit us, some of which may not. But this is really, I would say, social media is like this giant phase change line, right, in society, where it's like a few companies learned how to entice people through these platforms to be able to provide a ton of their behavior in order to help them maybe achieve a few things. Like, for example, this is going to help direct information towards the book that y'all are, as you all watch this. But in exchange for what? And like at what expense is kind of the theme that I like to bring up. What are we getting out of that? And so a few different things that I talk about in there specifically is, and I would say this is just largely my understanding after the last 3 or 4 years of going at this full time, creating things and trying to help others, running some ad campaigns, building some different courses that we've run through on this topic and such, is like, what is social media? What is at the core of it, which is this user generated content. We create things for them and they put them out there. It's really, I would say, a megaphone. It's going to amplify things. And they build that off of a model that is an ad-based revenue model. So the reason that this really works for most social media platforms is because folks like myself that make a video, say on behavior analysis, I can host it there, but then they can run and match advertisements to that based on all that demographic and psychographic information that we provide. So if you're on YouTube, it's a way to experience this all the time. Quite often is like you click into a video, it'll run a pre-roll ad. That ad might be super relevant to who you are and what you do, depending on how much data they have on you. And that is the way that they really fund you. So I dive into the ad-based revenue model a little bit more, and then try to bring it back into like the behavior analytic context. And I'll pause here in just a sec. So the question kind of becomes like, how do we use this as a field? I think the first part of that that I was trying to kind of answer is like, what is social media and like what's really going on, which I look at as this massive behavioral experiment that's going on actually. And then the second form of this is kind of like, what is behavior analytic content? Like, how could we leverage and use this? And what are potentially some of the pitfalls of it as well? Like these kind of like, I guess, guiding recommendations on how to potentially leverage it, or ways in which we might be able to handle some of the concerns. So questions like which platform's best, it's going to depend on your goals, but I'll dive into that a little bit more in there. I guess the one area that I think that was like the most fun to conceptualize, put together, and kind of like culminates my experience as well, like social media and behavior analysis, is like, what is behavior analytic content? Because we see right now, I think on a few different platforms, a number of people trying to leverage it in different ways. Sometimes it's in a way that's so different from how traditional academia has been disseminating behavior analysis, or it's so different from like how maybe other creators are already currently sharing, that it causes hiccups. And that might be just like a comment disagreement. That might be a DM saying, a direct message to someone like saying, I don't like this. But there's been as much as, and I've experienced these myself, like by posting a video that has absolutely nothing to do with a particular entity or person, sometimes people take that as offensive content and try to issue cease and desist letters and like other concerning situations that go on as a result of that. So like when you're stepping outside of the norm, which is largely what's going on with social media and behavior analysis over the last like 5 years, I'd say, there's kind of like this dark side, and like this side that not everybody experiences too. So try to offer some considerations for those that are creating on like, hey, here's some lessons that I've learned. A good example is like, you should never be rolling on somebody else's expense, is the saying. So if I'm creating something that's throwing somebody else under the bus, probably going to run into a lot of issues. And I've learned that lesson the hard way, in particular with like one video that I did that wasn't necessarily intended that way, but that was the effect it had. And it caused a lot of issues. So there's some things like that. But there's also considerations for those consuming, which I would say here that if anybody's watching this and they're like, this whole area just stresses me out and I don't understand all these creators trying to put stuff out there. My stance is it's going to happen regardless or not. Why not step in with those creators and try to make really good stuff? Like the folks that might not be social media savvy are oftentimes in our field the ones that have like the most immense amount of knowledge, clinical skills, and things that could make some of that online content just absolutely fantastic. So that's like a big long rundown of I think what's in the book. Maybe I can pause there for a second, see if that brought anything up.
Yeah, so much. Jacob and I both kind of laughed when you said, people who have a lot of content and information to share but are not social media savvy, and that is 1,000% us. Like, this is a daily
Yeah.
conversation between the two of us. We have all these like great ideas, and I think we see this. Like, everybody's on Facebook, everybody's on Instagram, Twitter, all these other platforms, YouTube, whatever it might be. But just navigating it, and just kind of knowing like the nuances of it, I think is what makes it challenging. And what that sort of brings me back to is, we're terrible as a field, right, at disseminating. We're great with each other.
Yeah.
It's just like the broader, like getting out there, and really being able to disseminate information, to come into contact with other people who this information would be really valuable, whether it's parents or businesses, whomever might benefit from this knowledge. So that's kind of like a theme, like a recurring theme, I know for me. Just and how do we take this? Like, how does somebody who like us, who are terrible at social media? I'm really good at posting pictures of my dogs. Like, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
Like, I could do that all day long. Come up with creative hashtags, But when it really comes to like pushing this information out there, I think that's where I'm just like, I don't even know where to begin,
Yeah.
So any advice, like as a field, like what can we do to kind of push ourselves forward?
I think two thoughts come to mind. One that I hope I wrote in there, I think I did, was like try to make each post that much better. Like it's this iterative process of like, that was good, what we did yesterday, but like, how do we make it better today? And that's something that I've thought about, probably was instilled in me in my like clinical training, behavior analysis, actually, of like, hey, like you're helping serve these clients, but like, what can you learn today? Then, 15, 20, 30 minutes from a mentor, advisor, whatever it is, article that will just make your practice that much better and like make everything a little bit better. And I've done the same thing largely on social media. If you were to look at like a progression of the posts, I mean, you could dig into something like the daily BA page, and if you dig back into the early videos into now, you'll see this giant transformation of the thumbnails, which are the images that show before you click the video. Those thumbnails turns out that the video content matters, obviously, like what you put out there on YouTube. But if you don't have a title and a thumbnail that entices people to click in, you're not even going to get you're not even going to get the opportunity to share what's in that video. So you can have the most amazing, fantastic video, but if you don't have a thumbnail and title that importantly have to line up to that video content, right? Like, you can't be clickbaiting people in through a title and thumbnail that doesn't actually show what's in there. But if those things aren't on point, like perfect in the sense, then you can't necessarily even expect people to watch your content. So like, there's just layers of this that start to matter. So the reason I brought up that thumbnail one is you can see just the change over 3 years, like how I try to think about these thumbnails. And the cool thing is, on the back end of these platforms, they give you a whole lot of metrics. I don't know who's watching. I don't know the specific behavior of any one individual, but I have a lot of aggregates. For example, I'll know, generally speaking, with a video, the percentage of it watched, what locations it was watched in, the gender breakdown of that. The geography gets down into state levels usually, but I think you can break it down even more. Like, I don't know the single person ever, but I could start to be like, oh, hey, like this thing is resonating well with people in this area, or it's resonating with this type of audience. And I can also look at things like where a video stops being interesting, and I can pick up from that feedback. So like, there's a whole, I guess, where I'm going with this, there's a whole area of like learning that and refinement that goes along with it, and that can be data driven. So for a behavior analyst, it's likes numbers. While it's not in a single subject format like we're used to in our field, I've got data that I can make decisions around that help improve things. So that has always been on the back end and just drives more and more of what I do, which I think is really nice. And then the other thing, kind of directly to try to directly answer your question more, is like, where to start. I've realized I've always operated for the most part as like a one person working on like that particular social media channel. But I've had the opportunity to work on a few teams. Currently work on one that's outside the field right now, where we have a number of people that are responsible, for example, of like getting the post up, but someone's making the video copy, maybe someone's writing the text, someone else wrote the script, someone else double checked on the review, which all of a sudden you're thinking like, how much time is going into this social media post, right? Like, it might get a little crazy. But when you get the right system down with the right people involved, it gets really seamless. So For example, someone that might not be social media savvy on like what hashtags to include, what format ratios to be using to get the most engagement, how to do the editing or color stylistic sort of things, like what time to post, all that. Like if you don't know that, but you know really valuable things that people are looking for in behavior analysis, then you can contribute the actual content and then allow other people to refine that message. So I've kind of looked at these as like the ideal setup is if you're not a master of all the trades, which quite frankly, very few of us are, and like you can only go so far with that, then working in a group that understands different components. So for example, knowing the actual platform, knowing how knowing the inside and out of like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, like what they're prioritizing right now and like how to kind of leverage each of those. Someone knowing how to kind of edit, refine, and get content in a way that like looks good. Someone that can write good copy, it's like text that actually is included, and someone that knows how to the behavior analytic component, right? Like what you're trying to share and like how to distill that. Those could all be like individual people that are on our team that are sharing things on social media. So it's a very much a team effort in bringing people together. Is what I've come to realize and I guess practice as well.
So basically, we need to put a team together.
Potentially, yes.
Two of us isn't going to cut it.
Well, I guess one other thing. There's always going to be something that you can't. Like, there's always going to be something that you're like, if I just did this, if I just did this. Yeah. So that's where that daily iteration comes back in. Is just like do the best you can with what you have. The next day, try to make it a little bit better. I know big brands that'll have literally dozens of people on their social media channels, which is not realistic for most APA companies or even individuals, right? But if you're focusing on that incremental increase in quality and you're listening to the data, I think that's the best thing that we can ask for right now.
I'd love to talk to you a little bit about there's social justice, but there's also compassion, and social media can diverge from having compassionate behaviors exhibited on, especially towards feedback. And I see for myself personally, a fair bit of avoidant behavior when it comes to posting, largely because of concerns about how messages may be perceived. I would love to hear from you, somebody that has posted, by controversial, I mean multiple-sided topics where individuals will not take your side necessarily. Like, how do you navigate that? And again, like kind of previously, before social media exploded, dissemination was largely through articles, and it was controlled by those that control publications. And that's good in a sense, but like kind of there's now more voices that are being heard in the field. So I'd just love to hear your perspectives and some of the feedback that you've gotten and how you move towards your committed behaviors to disseminating ABA as you see it.
So the gatekeeper, I don't know if the gatekeepers are changing from like publication and more traditional media outlets to these social platforms, like completely overtaking them, or if it's just like we have additional gatekeepers now, additional outlets with social media, right? But that's definitely a theme, and one of the things I kind of bring up in the chapter is you're always, regardless of where you're publishing, like you're almost always held to a terms of service and somebody else's gatekeeping standards. So I guess an important first thought there is like know what those are so that you're not violating those, because that's an area where some creators run into sort of things. But largely speaking, the I guess for people that might find things getting amplified that they don't agree with and they run into some issues with that aspect, part of it is that aspect that the gatekeepers have changed. Like there's now more ways to potentially have your voice heard. You are beholden to those gatekeepers of like social media's terms of service, so Facebook, YouTube, like I'm beholden to like what those are. But there's more avenues for me to choose from as a creator, or someone trying to share my voice, of like where to go. So like that's cool. There's more degrees of freedom potentially. But like everything that you post is public, it's going to be public, and especially if it is like not in line with the zeitgeist of the times, whatever that is, or whatever, whatever field, like expect some potential pushback. The way that I've dealt with that, and I think the best framework for that is to try to work within your team of folks to pre-vet things and try to think things out beforehand. So like when you're posting something, can you think about the different ways in which people might perceive it, and then can you prepare for that in the way that you create it? Now that's not to like always say that you just create something that you feel doesn't like have backbone or like has the message that you're trying to put out there per se, but just like, have you thought those out and kind of planned your content in a way such that it's ready for being heard by multiple audiences? Because when you publish something publicly, like that thing is up there and literally anybody in the world can check it out. So that's one side of it. The other side I would say is there's you're never going to please everybody, unfortunately. You can do that maybe if you really controlled, paywalled, and like put all your stuff in for a specific audience or something like that. We're actually seeing some of that happen in behavior analysis, I think. But like it's going to happen. The question is, I've kind of separated these between what I'll call like a legit good criticism of like, hey, you forgot about this, or you explained this concept wrong, or something like that. And then there's like the other side, which is someone completely taking some out of context, or just like taking a stab at your character, pointing out like what might be character flaws, etc. Right? Those are almost like easier to deal with. I feel like you have to develop this like tough skin they talk about of like looking at the comment sections. Someone might point out like, for example, I wear a hat, I'm balding. Like if someone saw my head every day, I would get balding comments all the time. Like that sucks. It's not going to really eat into me too much personally. Like I've built a skin on those sort of things. But it's the ones where you're off and someone critiques you, like those ones hurt the most, I would say. And it's because you actually did mess up. So what I've tried to do for those is if I make an error, try to learn from that, of course, but realize that you can put it into like a review process. So what more and more creators are doing nowadays is they have a second layer of review. So like anytime I do an interview with somebody, that always goes back to them for review, sometimes a second person to be able to just double check that there's nothing that we can see that's going to be off kilter, potentially for different audiences, or that we're at least prepared for what it might do. But the one that also shapes up, and I think that's what you're maybe getting at more, and what people really struggle with is comments, critiques, attempts to potentially cancel an idea, cancel a thought, the whole cancel culture area, or areas where people try to use different power dynamics to potentially like squash an idea or squash a person that has an idea or that's amplifying an idea, right? And to those, like, it's a mess. First of all, I've had a few times where people have done things and called me out for particular things, and it's quite unbelievable and nasty. Like when you actually experience what that's like it'll take days off of your life of just having to deal with the issue, whether it's justified or not. It takes an unbelievable amount of toll psychologically and like physically to be able to just like handle that. That said, like you're stepping into that as a creator to potentially run into. So like this isn't like a oh pity me, it's a like nature of it. And I feel like our field and really our, at least the culture in America right now, it's like we're learning how to handle this amplification of so many voices. I don't want to pretend that I understand the best way to move forward. What I try to do, I guess, in this piece, to bring it back to what we wrote, was what are the tenets of behavior analysis? Like what does contextual mean? And like, are we creating towards things that like ring true with a contextual view of behavior? And if we're doing that, I think that we should call it plenty good enough. And if you're critiquing on things that aren't that, then my take would be like, if it's making it better, cool. But if you're just trying to pull things down because it's great behavior analytic content, but it's not in the form that you want it in, we're not a structural topographical field, right? Like, thanks, but no thanks. So I don't know if that answered it at all. It's a really like we're like learning how to go through this right now. So,
and you're really like, paving a trail, having done this for so many years, and shifting the conversation and making it more accessible. right? Like kind of that's the reality.
Yeah.
How many people are accessing these journals, like kind of even within the field.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's exciting in a way, and I know, and I can see how it would make some people nervous and scared.
Yeah. You know, the one thing that you just reminded me of is if we had a student or a client that we were trying to work with that had that only communicated in picture exchange communication systems, are we going to walk in there? Are we going to start speaking to them? Are we going to start writing, put them in front of a computer on an automated program for them to learn instruction through, right? Like, no way. Like, we would never do that, right? Like, that is going to violate, and like any behavior analyst, I think would be able to spot out, like, this is not how we can approach this situation. And when I realized the dissemination opportunities, each of those are just different forms. And for whatever reason, there's different people prefer different forms, probably a reinforcement history, these sort of things, right? But that we need just as much as we need the articles, we need the journals, we need the scientific magazines, we need the YouTube channels, we need the Instagram channels, we need the TikTok creators, we need all of this coming together. Because if you're only putting out in one area, I think we've all learned this and echoed this at some point in our careers. Like, if you're only publishing in Java, for example, or like BAP or something like that, like, you're going to be heard by a group, but it's not always going to be the group that you're trying to reach, because that's going to have a defined audience.
Mm-hmm.
So if we just create the same things for all these different places and these different forms, these different audiences, then we could potentially disseminate more. So the question always comes down to, like, where are you trying to reach? And that'll help define where you start there. I go through a little bit of that, but yeah, we need things in different forms, or else we're completely missing the opportunity to potentially put our science in the limelight. Does that help?
Fantastic.
That's so
Thank you so
huge.
much. Is there anything
Cool.
that's coming up on the?
What's that? Sorry.
Is there anything that that's coming up for you that you'd like to share, that people can check out, of your work, or videos that are coming up, conferences?
Yeah, so we have a pretty cool lineup, I would say, that we're putting together for what we call the convergence of human animal training technology. This is one of those things that's received a little bit of critique sometimes based off the name, actually. But the idea is that we bring experts that understand behavior across a whole number of species and together to just share with each other. So it's an area where you're experiencing things that you've almost never even thought were potentially relevant to you, that you then pick up and you're like, holy cow, I can apply this tomorrow in this totally different context. It's centered around human behavior, behavior at the end of the day in the subject matter of the field. But yeah, that's called ChatCon that you can check out. But the other thing is, I would say, I meant to bring this up earlier, but the model of, like, part of the reason I've been able to spend so much time here and being able to, like, create things like this is I learned pretty quickly that I'd run out of stuff to say myself, and I need to involve others as much as I possibly could. Or it was just going to take forever for me to potentially do something, because I'd have to get so much expertise in it first, right? So I'd say, if there's anything that you all want to check out, the Daily BA, like, has been, I think, largely successful because of two things. Like, I've learned how to edit and film, and like, that work just takes an immense amount of time. But just as importantly, or more importantly, is there's been, I don't know at this point now, probably 100 plus or 200 people that have at some point shared, like, their experience, thoughts, etc., which has, like, helped make that channel far better and, like, much more interesting. So my hat's off to all the people who've done those sort of things. And if you just want to explore that channel, you should be able to find something that interests you if you're interested in behavior analysis. I know I don't have it in front of me, but I know that there's a number of different people like yourself that have, like, contributed that before. So there's a lot of people that you can learn about just as a result of who I've ran into and convinced to jump on the YouTube channel.
Ryan, awesome. Like, really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Get the
so
book,
much.
y'all. Yeah, get the